made up of higher education professionals who are really dedicated to student leadership programs, learning what it means to be a leader in this day and age and to make effective change in the world that we and the students live in. And so we do this to basically share information, to understand best practices that are going on around the country, and really just kind of disseminate all the information and the research that's going along in the field of collegiate leadership and collegiate leadership practices. And so through this, with the knowledge community, we have webinars, we have newsletters, we have also pre-conference meetings and kind of series before the national conference, and then also sponsor programs throughout the different programs and conferences that we have throughout the year on the regional basis as well as the national level as well. And so if you have any more questions about the knowledge community or want to get any more involved, you can please visit us on the website, and the NASPA website, under the knowledge community section with the student leadership programs, as well as on Facebook and then Twitter as well. And you can just search under student leadership programs knowledge community. And so that's where you can get information about the newsletters that we have and the upcoming conferences, as well as the upcoming webinars that we're going to have. Also, this is where you can, if you're interested, get your name out there as far as being somebody who is wanting to present. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more towards the end of the program. But if you are listening to this webinar thinking, hey, that's something that I'd love to do, we'd love to talk to you and love to see if we might be able to make that happen for you. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to Steve and to Christina so they can give you all the information that they have about the restorative practices and their work with leadership within higher education. So Steve, Christina, thank you so much for being here, and take it away.
All right, great. Thank you, Ross. I'm Christina Olstead, and I am an Assistant Director of Residential Education here at the University of Vermont, and I've been here at UVM for the past 5 years. The past 2 years, we have been working directly with the International Institute for Restorative Practices, and I'm going to be sharing a lot of stories with you today about circles and responding to harm in community, how we proactively build community. And we're definitely going to talk about the community standards model and how restorative practices has been able to really bring that community standards model to life here on campus. And so I'm going to be presenting with Steve Core, and I'm going to turn it over to Steve to give you a little bit of information about restorative practices and to ground you.
All right. Thank you very much, Christina. If I can have the presenter rights handed to me, Christina, that would be great. Okay, very good. Well, as Christina just mentioned, my name is Steve Core, and I'm an instructor and a consultant here at the International Institute for Restorative Practices. Again, as others have shared here on the panel, I'm very, very excited to be a part of this today, and certainly in particular to be able to share with all of you who are connected to the knowledge community and are sharing ideas, new technologies, new constructs and models and all that with one another, sharing best practices. I'm really particularly excited to be a part of that today. So as Christina just mentioned, she is certainly going to be sharing a number of stories and some of the work and some of the outcomes that has happened with University of Vermont implementing restorative practices. But I think it's valuable for me to go through some of the basic constructs, just to really give us all a brief foundation. So as we go along further into this call, and we use some phrases or some understanding, we'll all be on the same page. So looking forward to do that, and we'll get started with that now. So we are, as you can see on the slide here, we are a graduate school. We're located in southeastern Pennsylvania, in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And we offer a Master's of Science in Restorative Practices in Youth Counseling, a Master's of Science in Restorative Practices in Education. So it's not just a counseling model or anything along those lines that we have developed here. We've taken it to the point where it's an emerging science and also something where you can engage in graduate study in. So a little bit more about that later. So just real quick, just to let people know some of the exciting things that are happening, this map, this slide that you see here, shows where we are around the world, and that's humbling and exciting to be able to say. The gold place names that you see there are where we have offices in Canada, United States, United Kingdom, Hungary, and also Australia. And the other names that you see there in white, other place names that you see in white, are official affiliates we have around the world. And so we're in 16 countries at this time, and that is growing. And we started this work largely in terms of our professional development and training. We started this work in the late 90s. And so, again, I share this not to say, oh boy, aren't we wonderful, look at us, even though I do firmly believe we do a number of things very, very well. I share this because clearly we're onto something. This is something that is resonating around the world, not just in certain parts of the United States or whichever, but is resounding, and people are connecting, are excited about it around the world. And a major premise of restorative practices is that people change their behavior based upon the bonds and the connections that they form with one another. And so, taking a look at that and kind of extrapolating it a little bit further, you can say in some sense, some of the behavioral problems or difficulties or communication problems and all of that, in some sense are greatly impacted by a decrease in bonds and connections and community. And that is not something, as I mentioned, that's just happening here, but is happening around the world. So when we do this work, the focus, one of the main focuses becomes, how do we create these bonds? How do we create a sense of community? A lot of people will say it's important to do that, and in higher ed, we do different events and gatherings and all that, which are fantastic. But it's not the event in and of itself that creates that bond. It is, really critical that we take a look at providing opportunities for people to share affect, for people to share their emotion, for people to share their hopes, their dreams, their wishes, what they're excited about, what disappoints them with one another. That's what creates those bonds. So how do we go about doing that on purpose all the time? So the fundamental hypothesis of restorative practices is simply this, that human beings are happier, they're more cooperative and productive, and more likely to make positive changes in their behavior when those in positions of authority do things with them rather than to them or for them. And so the main piece that I want to focus on here is positions of authority right here. Well, I travel around and provide professional development in restorative practices across the country and sometimes out of the country, which is kind of neat. And a number of folks, ask me, so what type of model is this? It's important for some people to kind of characterize or to view things through a particular lens, and that makes a lot of sense. That's the way people learn. And they say, is it a community development model? Is it a discipline model? Is it a conflict resolution model? And the true answer to that is no. It includes aspects of that, but ultimately at its heart, restorative practices is a leadership model. It's a leadership model in the sense that it is the way in which we choose to exercise our authority or our influence. So be the authority or the influence, be it given to you in terms of in an organizational structure, hierarchy type of a sense, or just in whatever it is, those aspects of human personality that creates influence in a group. But whatever it might be, how do we utilize that? How do we utilize that given authority? How do we utilize that influence in a way that creates bonds and connections and has those around us function in the way that we would like to see them function? Oops, sorry about that. So the aim of restorative practices in residential communities then becomes simply this: to develop community and then to manage conflict and tensions by repairing harm and restoring relationship. Now, I want to be very upfront, very honest. our work in terms of here at the International Institute for Restorative Practices, IARP, has largely been around K to 12 education in schools. Our history goes back to 1977 when we first started working with troubled and at-risk youth in southeastern Pennsylvania, and started what is now people know as alternative education programs. And we had at one point we've had to, for a lot of different reasons, funding-wise and all that, we've been kind of forced here in the state of Pennsylvania to downsize a little bit. So, but at our height, we had 8 alternative schools and 18 group homes, home and community supervision program and all that, working with struggling adolescents and their families in southeastern Pennsylvania. And we were getting some really, really positive results. That's actually my background. I was a counselor and then a principal in one of our alternative schools for over a dozen years. And getting some positive results, and then we began to say, we have something here. And then through a different number of names and all that, through combining with restorative justice, we came upon restorative practices and began to share that with others. I want to just really quickly, with restorative justice, which many people might be familiar with, you think of, and actually by its definition, when there has been harm, when there has been a problem, you bring together those who have been impacted. A person who did the harm, if you will, the offender. We wouldn't use those names in working with people, but for clarity's sake on this webinar, the offender and the person who has been harmed, the victim, bringing them together and their community of care, all the key stakeholders in an incident, and talking about what happened, talking about the impact that it had, and what we need to do to make things right. Well, if you're familiar with restorative justice and the research around that, the outcomes, the satisfaction rates, the compliance rates in restorative justice practices is very, very high compared to standard, disciplinary or judicial processes. And so, taking a look at restorative justice, you see that responsive piece. So we said, hey, here's some really powerful things that are happening. Clearly, some of the dynamics that take place here really have some long-term effects as well as immediate effects. But those formal conferences, first of all, are responsive and also take a lot of time to run. What can we do on a daily basis, hour by hour, minute by minute? What can we do to create that same outcome in our daily practice? And so that's where restorative practices comes from. And so in restorative practices, we focus on building that community. Like 80% of what you do with restorative practices is in the on purpose, all the time, proactive, creative development of those bonds, development of those connections, development of connectedness, development of community. I oftentimes like to say when I do professional development or training that you just look at your work at all times, 24/7, through the lens of how do I build connection? How do we draw people closer together? And of course, I'm not talking about like a romantic type of connection, but just knowing more about one another, knowing people's likes and dislikes, and what their fears are and what their hopes are, and all of those things, which draws connection together, making it much less likely that the disruptive and hurtful behavior, vandalism, things of those natures, making it much less likely that those things will happen in the first place. And if they do happen, we have social capital built up. We have bonds built up upon which to draw from. To take a look at then the next part here of the aim, to take a look at how do we manage those conflict and tensions. The focus becomes repairing harm and restoring the relationships. So we work really hard to build those connections. When something happens, we take a look at how it impacts the relationships. If it has harmed them, how do we repair that harm? And how do we restore everybody back into right standing? So we'll get into more of that a little bit later with some of the stories. Let me move through my slides here. Okay. So as I mentioned, restorative practices ultimately is a leadership model. And so I know that there were the professional staff in residential life settings or on higher ed college campuses. But also another significant issue is that of RAs. And again, in terms of res life, we have young people who are the same age, younger, maybe a little bit older than some of the people that they have authority over. And that's a very, very difficult position to be in. Maybe you're doing the work because, hey, you want to get some financial, alleviation from the bills or whatever it is. But you want to make a difference and you want to do some good work. But how do you go about doing that? How do you go about exercising that authority? Very, very tricky question. It's also the same in organizations when you get promoted within the ranks, so to speak. And now all of a sudden, all these people who you were buddies and friends with and coworkers, now all of a sudden you're in a position of authority. How do you navigate that? So some really interesting questions there. What we talk about is right in front of you here, the social discipline window, the cornerstone of what we do with restorative practices. And we would say there are two main factors that go along with leadership. And we call them, control, meaning the limit setting, the discipline, the parameters, the expectations. If you don't like that word control, that's fine. Call it what you want. But this notion that when you are in a position of authority, you are expecting other people to operate and to act and to function in particular ways. But then there's also the support, the encouragement, the nurturing, the care, the love, and whatever you want to call that, the providing of resources and time and space and freedom to fail and all of those things. That's all a part of leadership. And if you were to plot those two factors on a graph from low to high, as you can see here, you get four basic options. And again, the social discipline window, the way in which we exercise our authority. So think of a person in a position of authority. Let's just, for this call, for this webinar, let's just say a resident assistant, an RA. So let's think of an RA who tries to exercise their authority in a way that has very little support, but very, very high on the control. They would be in this punitive box. It's my way or the highway. Turn that music down. Clean up that mess. Sit down and be a part of this event or game night that we've had planned or whatever it might be. Now, to move on to another box, think about an RA that maybe has very little control, sets very little limits, but is really high on the support. Okay, we would say that that's permissive. And I'm not going to really expect a whole lot of you, but we're going to have fun and we're going to be buddies. And if you do something that's not okay, I'll help you kind of keep it a secret and we'll clean it up fast so nobody gets in trouble, and then you'll really like me, and then you're going to, then you will behave the way that you should. Okay. Well, typically that's not the way people bring about their best behavior. A third option is to have low control and low support. So I'm not going to have any expectations for you, and I'm not going to engage with you in any way. That's just being neglectful and not doing anything. But there's a fourth option, and that's what we want to really focus on today. That is balancing high levels of control with high levels of support. We call that being restorative and doing things with people. So going back to the fundamental hypothesis, we're going to get the behavior we want. People are going to grow. They're going to feel safer, be more cooperative and productive. When the people who are in positions of authority and influence do things with them in an engaging way that has high control, high expectations with high support. So that's pretty simple and pretty straightforward stuff. And we try to really take some behaviors which are a little bit nebulous, a little bit, kind of hard to define, and we codify them into really simple words so that we can all be on the same page. So in the way that I'm exercising my authority, am I doing it in a with fashion? Am I balancing high control with high support? Or am I angry and frustrated right now, so I jump into the punitive box and I just let somebody have it? I'm sure there's many of us on the call right now that can relate to that. Or this person's really cool, he's a buddy of mine, or, he's close to my age, or she's close to my age, and I just kind of want to make things nice and smooth, because it feels better for me. I don't want them to not like me, so I'll be in the for box. Or in our work, in any setting, have we ever gotten overwhelmed? and just jumped into the not box and said, that's it. I'm done. I'm not doing anything. I'm just going to sit here. Okay. So in those gray boxes, we have a tendency to go into that because it feels better in the moment. But being a wise professional means being aware of that, handling your own emotions and your own feelings appropriately, but realizing what's best for the people that I'm working with. How can I handle this situation, interact with them, deal with them in a restorative way? So that's the social discipline window. And any questions about that, we're going to leave ample time for questions at the end of the webinar. So any questions that you have with that, please feel free to do that. Even if it feels somewhat challenging, that's great. To me and to Christina, that means that you're really thinking about what does this truly look like? And so even the challenging questions, please don't try to be mean. I have feelings. But, if there's something you're really chewing on, please ask it so that we can have an opportunity to discuss it. So the social discipline window is the way that we exercise our authority, essentially individually, if you will. But I just want to quickly take a look at this next slide here, which we call the organizational change window, how to bring about change within an organization. So people who are in a higher level in terms of administration or whatever it might be, how do you exercise that authority in a way that makes the people that you supervise want to come along and follow, and apply their creativity and go the extra mile and do those things. So you can see here the exact same construct, except we have pressure on the organizational change window where before we had control. So pressure is just mandate or requirement. You will act this way. I'm the person that's in charge here, and I do have expectations for the way that you're going to behave, and I expect that you do it. I'm not just going to say, yeah, you should do this. I'm going to really expect to see it. Pressure. And then support is the time, the space, the freedom to fail, all those things that I mentioned before. So again, just real quickly, you can see how it rolls out. So if you have very little support and all pressure, that's just top down. It's imposed. It seems fast in the moment, but it breeds a lot of resentment. Very little pressure, but very high support. That's just bringing in consultants and I'm a consultant myself. So, but just kind of, let's just talk about it, or let's just emulate best practices, but we're not actually expecting people to do things differently. That's the 4 management style. I'm just going to give you this book. I'm just going to give you this training, and I'm just going to hope that your behavior changes. Well, most people don't operate that way. They need some pressure to change their behavior. There's low pressure and low support, and we just say that that's in the not box. It's actually cosmetic change. Sometimes it's whatever the latest fad is, and you buy the poster, and you buy the bracelets, and you buy the books, and you just throw them all over the place, but you don't actually do anything different. That's just cosmetic or actually avoiding change. But to really bring about change in an organization, you must balance pressure, expectation with support. And this allows those that you are managing to connect their personal and professional growth. And we talk about a self-managed project. What we mean by that is people can say, hey, here's my strengths, but here's what I struggle with, and here are some plans that I'm putting in place to help me achieve that. And there's freedom and safety to be able to do that. So again, I like to say a minute to learn, a lifetime to master. Pretty simple, straightforward construct here. But how to go about doing that on a daily basis, how to implement that in our daily practice is what the real work is. And Christina, again, will share some stories related to that. Let me just get a few other pieces here. So what does it look like on the ground, so to speak? We talk about the restorative practices continuum. And it's a range from informal to formal. The practices, as you go from left to right, they take more time, they involve more people, there's more structure, they're more complete. So the most informal is just simply affective statements. And so we talk about how important it is to build these connections and these bonds. So we use affective statements to identify how someone's behavior impacted that. I felt happy, I felt proud, I felt supported, I felt encouraged. Or I felt angry, I felt hurt, I felt disappointed, I felt scared when you identify the behavior. So affective or emotional statements about how someone's behavior impacted you and impacted the bond between the two of you. Affective questions is asking somebody who has been harmed how a behavior impacted them, or asking somebody who did the behavior, how do you think other people are feeling after you responded this way or acted this way. A small impromptu conference is bringing together a few people in an informal way to address concerns, asking them what happened, who's been impacted, what were people thinking of at the time, what do we need to do to make things right? And we'll have some more stories about that. Group of Circle is bringing together a larger group of people to either proactively talk about how do we build our community, what's important to us, or reactively, there's been a problem, somebody trashed the bathroom, somebody wrote inappropriate words on the wall or whatever it is. How are we going to deal with this? How have people been impacted? Let's give people a voice. What do we need to do to repair the harm? And then the formal conference, where it is scripted, it is formal, it is bringing victim and offender and their communities of care together to talk about what happened, how people were impacted, and what needs to be done to repair that harm and to make things right. So some continuum, a range of practices here that you can look for as evidence of, are we growing in our restorative practices and our restorative practice in our organization, on our res hall, on our floor? Well, you can walk up and down and just listen. Am I hearing effective statements? Am I seeing small impromptu conferences? Am I seeing proactive development of community? Those are things that you can look for to identify the growth of restorative practices in your organization, in your res hall. So the implementation model, and I'm going to go through these slides very quickly. If I need to, I can come back. But there's 3 days of training for all of the RAs and the professional staff, and if there's other key stakeholders across the campus that might, be important for them to be a part of it, that they all come together and go through 3 days of training. Day 1 is an introduction to restorative practices. Day 2 is using circles effectively, and day 3 is facilitating the restorative conference, or the most formal restorative practice on the continuum. We then have, as we move forward, monthly or more often than that if needed, phone calls or maybe even webinars or Skyping, whatever it is, to assist and support the implementation of restorative practices, to talk about things that people are trying, what's working, what's not working, give people ideas and to help them move forward. But then we also provide a 3-day training of trainers so that institutions can have their own cadre of staff that can provide the ongoing training. So in terms of sustainability, you do not have to keep coming back to the IARP to be able to sustain the changes in your school or in your campus. So a real quick look at some of the pieces that are a part of our Building Campus Community program. One of the things that we talk about is have RAs do a proactive circle with first-year students when they first come on the campus. Before the upperclassmen or other members of the community come for their first year, bring them together, put them in a circle, give them an opportunity to ask and answer questions such as these. What are you hoping for in your first year here? What are your concerns? What are some of your long-term hopes and dreams? So again, you can see these are the questions that we put out, but you can, all kinds of questions you can come up with. We don't own these questions by any stretch of the imagination, but it's an opportunity for people to come together and to begin to share in a very real way, free expression of emotion or affect or feelings. That's what creates the bonds. And so we're deliberately doing that, giving people an opportunity to hear from one another.
Hey,
so
Steve,
yes,
do you mind
please.
if I jump in real quick?
That's great.
So, I've had an opportunity here at UVM to be a part of these opening circles, just to support our RAs in our first year of implementation, the implementation of restorative practices. And, to have 50 to 60 first-year students in certain communities, some of them have about 30 to 40, it really depends, but to have them all sitting around in a circle, sharing with each other has been really powerful. And, initially there was some students talking over who had the talking piece. We actually utilize a talking piece in the circle format so that each person has the floor to respond to each question. And all it took was for me to name a dynamic that this is your community that you're forming, that you're going to be living in close proximity for the next year. These are your neighbors. These are your, potential lifetime friends. And so it's really important to provide the space for each other to share in this circle. And the side conversations totally stopped after I said that, and people really paid, close attention to what each member of the community was sharing, and it was really exciting to see.
Awesome, thanks. And and if you're thinking about it, it's like, so why? I mean, why would they listen to that? And again, because here's first-year students that just came out of high school. What are they expecting? They're expecting, I don't want to paint everybody with the same brush here, but they're expecting, hey, knock it off, stop, close your mouth, pay attention. You're breaking the rules. Well, I mean, those things are true, but what's more important is this is how you are impacting your community and people that you're developing connection with. We're going to give you a voice. We're going to give you a say. Everyone's going to have a chance to be a part of this. And that's what brings people together and changes their behavior. So then when the other students return, we bring all of the floor together, or the hall, or however that works on your particular campus. And together, the entire community answers these questions. What do you think the ideal residential community looks like? What kind of behaviors might interfere with achieving that ideal community? And what can we as individuals and as a group do to overcome those obstacles to achieving an ideal community? Okay, so when we talk about restorative practices, the quick way of saying this, and we use this in all kinds of settings, from businesses to kindergarten, high school, college campuses, parents and families and all of that. We talk about, what's ideal, what gets in the way, and what commitments do you make? I mean, that's the shorthand version of it. So where people begin to talk about what does ideal residential community look like. And a number of us have probably thought about, you bring together a group of people and you go over the norms and you go over the expectations. Well, I get you. And I even know community standards talks about, and Christina will talk more about that, how it's important that we have certain understandings and all of that. But how do we go about getting that? There's a big difference between sitting in a circle, just sitting there not engaged, with an RA saying, don't dirty up the bathroom, keep it clean, or I'm going to lock the door, or whatever it might be, as opposed to, okay, everybody, what does ideal look like? Hey, you know what? I don't like it when things are messy. I really like it when we take care of stuff. And I'm looking forward to, being here and having fun. And part of that for me is going to be that we keep things clean. Well, the same idea was just put out there, but instead it comes from a peer in an engaging way as opposed to a top-down way. So what are the things that are going to get in the way? Oh, if we do this or if we do that, that's going to create problems. We're not going to like this. What are some of the commitments that we can make to making sure we move forward? Commitments as an individual and as a group, so that we achieve that ideal community. So right off the bat, we're creating that accountability, we're creating those connections, and then when problems occur, we just go right back to the expectations that everybody has come together to present. So Christina, I talked a lot longer than what I thought, so please take it.
Sure, that sounds good. All right. So as many of you on the call today are familiar with community standards and have maybe potentially incorporated community standards model in the way that you build your communities and hold communities accountable for what occurs on campus. So back in 2004 at the University of Vermont, Dr. Stacy Miller worked directly with Alvin Sturdivant, who was our associate director at the time, to really look at how to, manage hall communities. And they really pulled from Piper's work in 1998, for the community standards model. And really what this is a philosophy that encourages peer-to-peer accountability through dialogue, interaction, and perspective taking. Now, I'm sure many of us have read Piper's article and think this sounds like exactly what we need in residential life, but the implementation is where we really struggled here at UVM. And so, what sounded great in theory was very difficult to implement in practice because community standards relies on an implicit understanding of how to develop community without explicit practices that show staff how. So in community standards conversations that would occur in residential halls, you'd hear certain voices sharing what they would like for the community, but you rarely had an opportunity to hear all voices and what they needed from the community and what they wanted to commit to as being a part of that community. So in the academic year of 2010-2011, Residential Life implemented restorative practices as the complementary mechanism to facilitate the community standards process. And that's through how we build our communities and how we respond when harm occurs in the community. And I'm going to share quite a few examples of that today and some really powerful stories. So restorative practices complements community standards seamlessly because it gives residential life professionals and resident advisors the necessary tools and skills needed to proactively build and strengthen relationships within the community so that when issues arise, and they always do, they can utilize their social capital to reliably achieve positive outcomes. So restorative practices and providing a space for every single voice to come into the community, first year students sharing about their hopes and dreams, all the community members sharing what does the ideal community look like, what could detract from an ideal community, and what will you personally commit to, it begins the conversation around standards for the community. And through our proactive community building, what we've in a sense done is set up a format for how we respond when issues occur too, so that when there's an issue that happens in the community that affects the community, we circle up. We utilize a talking piece. It's the same way in how we've proactively built that community, but we're responding to the harm and providing everyone an opportunity to share how they've been affected by what has occurred, and talking about what do they need from their community and what can they commit to doing moving forward. All right, so how we've used restorative practices, getting residents to meet and know each other at the start of school. That one circle that I referenced earlier where, all the first year students were super excited to be there. They were starting those side conversations, and all it took was, talking about this is your community. These are your neighbors. It's really important that we provide space for each voice to come in to share what they need from the community. And I was surprised, I've worked in student affairs for 12 years, and I was surprised to see just how that comment really shifted the circle and, allowed everyone to focus on who had the floor. And that was a really positive, proactive moment. It also provides students the opportunity to interact and dialogue in positive ways. We've done proactive community circles around bias in the community, so you don't have to have a bias incident happen to talk about bias incidents. And we've had some really positive conversations come out of those circles that leads to other social justice and diversity conversations in the residence hall communities with individuals, with smaller groups, and then with the whole floor community. So how we have used it to respond to critical incidents. We've used it to help staff confront general and ongoing disruptive behavior that's occurred. It's helped us in managing the suicide of a student that occurred last fall. And, I've been here for 5 years at the University of Vermont. And last year was the first year of those 5 that we had a student suicide in the residence halls. And restorative practices provided us an avenue to be able to engage in conversations with students about how they're feeling, how they're doing, what do they need from the community, and what can they commit to providing the community at this time. And we just had another student death on campus, and we provided voluntary circles. So these are circles that students can attend if they're interested, or if they feel like this is an avenue where they needed to get some support. And I had the opportunity of facilitating several of these floor circles that were voluntary. And, they all ranged in attendance. Some had 10 people, some had 20 people per floor. And, it was amazing to hear the students really open up and say, one of the main reasons that they came was because, they're really struggling right now on how to support their peers who have experienced a tragic loss of their friend. How do they process through grief and loss was, a topic of conversation in the circle, and people being really vulnerable with each other in this space. And it's all about how you set the circle up to provide that environment for students to get real with each other and to really share some personal things. We've also used restorative practices to address an arson that occurred in the building and for extensive building damage. So I've had the opportunity to facilitate several restorative conferences, and that's, the most formal end of the continuum for restorative practices. And so here at UVM, happened last fall, where we had a student who was on a balance board and flipped on the balance board, knocked the sprinkler head, and thousands of gallons of water poured out and impacted the entire floor community. There were 10 rooms that were all triples that were displaced. The whole building was evacuated. This is a building of about 340 students in this part of one of our complexes that was affected, and they were out of the residence hall until 4 a.m. when it was finally cleared by fire and police, and we had to get SLPKC in to clean up the water damage, and it was an incredible amount of damage. And people were really upset that this occurred. People were like, I want to figure out who did this. They're really angry. And the student came forward and said, this is what happened. It was a mistake. I feel horrible about how I've, affected all of my peers. And, I provided him an opportunity to agree to participate in a restorative conference to really repair the harm and to reintegrate him into the community. Instead of being the person who set off the sprinkler head and dumped thousands and thousands of gallons of water, I wanted him to be reintegrated into the community. And so it's a voluntary process. He agreed to participate in a restorative conference, and he went to this conference with support. The RA served as a support to him. Also, his roommate served as a support to him. I had contacted all 30 students who were displaced, offered them an opportunity to participate in the restorative conference as well, and to have them share, what did you think when you realized what had happened? What impact has this incident had on you and others? What has been the hardest thing for you? And what do you think needs to happen to make things right? So they had an opportunity to share this with the individual who came forward and accepted responsibility. And he had an opportunity to share with those members who were affected what happened. What were you thinking at the time? What have you thought about since? Who's been affected by what you've done and in what way? And what do you think you need to do to make things right? And, we had the conference. Afterwards, there were refreshments. People were able to, gather together to talk. We created a contract that, was mutually agreed upon. And several days later, the student who accepted responsibility sent me an email and said, I was really skeptical about participating in this restorative conference. But hearing how my actions affected other people was really powerful, and I'm glad that I participated. So this was a voluntary process. Even though he was a little skeptical, he agreed to participate, and he was really glad that he did, because then he was reintegrated back into that community instead of being someone who has harmed the community. And that's the whole exciting piece around restorative practices and the ways that we can utilize it in residential education and the ways that we have utilized it. We've used restorative practices to respond to room and suite conflicts. Yeah, Steve.
And there's also an element of the story with the water damage of the people that were displaced.
Oh, yeah.
I know I talked about this, and Stacy, the director, talked about it. Just how angry they were, and there was some rumors, isn't that right? Some rumors that were spreading that it was done on purpose, and all of these things.
Oh, yeah.
And it's almost to the point where it's like we just have to remove this person from this community. But when they were in that conference and they heard how broken this person was and how it was a mistake and how some of the rumors that were flying around just weren't true, that led to the reintegration of that individual. It's a powerful story.
And so other ways that our RAs have utilized it are through Facebook conversations, using some of those effective statements and questions, day-to-day interactions. There's one bias response circle. I facilitated several circles specifically around bias and hate. And one incident that I'd like to share with you all today, and I have others that I can draw upon if you're interested, it occurred about 3 weeks ago. We had a targeted bias incident directed towards one of our assistant residence directors. It was a homophobic bias incident, and the staff member was really frustrated that this had occurred in their community where they live, that he was really hurt by it. And so the staff members, so I'm an assistant director here, and what I did was I pulled together the ARD, the RD, the residence director, and the RA for the floor community. And we were going to have a responsive circle. And I go into those conversations, knowing that I want to provide a tremendous amount of autonomy for my staff members. I will facilitate circles if they feel uncomfortable or feel like my expertise is really needed in this area. Or I will provide space to support RAs in facilitating circles, or the ARD or the RD. Now, since the ARD was a direct target, we would never have them facilitate the circle in response to the incident. But I did want to provide an opportunity if the RA or the RD felt comfortable. And, through those conversations, they said, we really feel like it would be best if you conducted the circle. And I agreed. And so it was a floor community of all men. It was one of our smaller floor communities, so there's approximately 30 residents. And we circled up. It was a mandatory community circle to respond to the incident that occurred. We did take attendance, so we knew exactly who was there, who was missing, so that we would follow up appropriately. Everyone knew that if they weren't going to be there, they needed to send emails, and then we could follow up individually, one-on-one. And this circle, I went in, I had, built rapport with the men as they were coming in. We all sat in a circle on the floor together, so we were all at the same height. I utilized a talking piece, and I shared, the reason why we're here today is because there was a bias incident that occurred in this community that directly targeted the assistant residence director, and I shared their name. They had cleared that with me prior to. They said, I want them to know that I was targeted, and I want them to know exactly what was said. And I said, oh, okay, so I shared what was said. I, shared my disappointment and frustration that this occurred in this community, that it violated our values and our common ground at the University of Vermont. And I was really concerned about the state of this community, that this could occur here. But I wanted to provide a space for the students to reflect on their experience with the state of their community. And so I asked them, how do you feel about the state of your community, that this incident has occurred in your community? How does that make you feel? And the responses from the men were incredibly powerful. Several men shared a history of being bullied and harassed, and how it's hurtful, it doesn't feel good, and the fact that someone was targeted in a bias incident in their floor community is really upsetting to them. So several people disclosed histories of being bullied and harassed. For the staff member who was targeted, he had an opportunity to share how he was personally affected. He was really hurt that this occurred, that his name was used, that it was a homophobic bias incident. And he, was surprised, because he had had really positive relationships with the men in the floor community. And, he was really frustrated that this had occurred. And he was never expecting something like this to happen at the University of Vermont. And that's not how he wanted to leave the University of Vermont, because he's had a really positive stay here in the HESA program and in the department. And one of the lines that a student shared, which was so powerful, the student said, I was really upset when the vending machine was broken into earlier this semester, because I knew that it wouldn't be replaced and I wouldn't have access to candy. But we can replace the broken glass on the vending machine. We cannot replace the broken glass on insert staff member's name here, hurt feelings. And that was so powerful to hear that story coming from a student sharing afterwards. After that circle, several students stayed to specifically check in with the staff member and share their disappointment that this had occurred. Also, the staff member shared with me how they really felt positive about the circle, that they felt, that hearing the students' response to the incident was really powerful and affirming, and that they didn't have that negative feeling about that floor community that they had going into the circle. So it was a very powerful interaction, and that's one of the examples of the power of restorative practices. So a little bit about our judicial data, just so you can see numbers, years. The first year that we implemented restorative practices, again, was 2010, 2011. And what we saw was our alcohol offenses went down, our drug offenses went down, our offenses against a person went down, our property offenses went up, our public order offenses went down, and our university policy violations went down. So this is in our judicial data up from one year to the next, the 10, 11 years when we incorporated restorative practices. And then also our vandalism data, as you can see, from 09 to 10, the total was 87,476, and then our fall 10 to spring 11, 72,000. So that's a difference of, savings year 2 versus year 1 is pretty substantial. So we've seen exciting data there too. Yes.
Christine, do you mind going back one slide, please?
Yeah, sure.
And I think what's really interesting, the offenses against person or people, and then the property offenses, I think that area right there is very, very significant. Now, you do see a reduction in the OAP, but just a few. But you actually, with the property offenses, you see an increase, and actually a fairly substantial increase. And so, folks may say, hey, what's going on with that? That makes perfect sense to me as a restorative practices practitioner, because what is happening here, both of those areas are areas that are plagued by silence. People don't say anything. When something happens to them, they keep their mouth shut. When their stuff gets stolen, when their stuff gets broken, they don't feel any support and they don't say anything. So what actually happens there is people start to feel a voice. They start to feel like, wow, I can actually say something and do something, and it's going to be handled in a real way, and the university is going to take it seriously. So they actually feel more empowered to be more honest with what is happening. And so that is why you see, just a slight decrease of what happened to the person offenses against people in the 10-11 year. But I would suggest that the 45 is a more accurate representation of what people actually experienced than what the 910, the 48 is. And again, same is true for the property offenses, the 119 to the 151. But the 151 is a much more accurate representation, and people are feeling, you know what? I'm not going to just allow the fact that somebody came in and took one of my CDs or MP3s or whatever it is nowadays. I'm not going to just let that slide. That's not okay. That's not what we do here. So I'm going to say something that I know it's going to be dealt with. So you actually see increases in that area. Now, for 11-12, we would hope that would, reduce some. But again, there's a lot of turnover in the community, so you have to be mindful of that as well. But clearly, people feeling more ownership and responsibility and accountability, and that things will be handled in that area.
Great. Yep. So I do want to provide an opportunity for questions, and Steve and I will both be able to field your questions. I also have some other stories that I could share if need be, that are exciting as well.
So Ross, have you been monitoring those questions? Do you have any for us?
Yes, I have been monitoring. There hasn't been anyone that has sent me any questions throughout the presentation, so if there's anyone there that has a question now. Oh, here's one that just came up from Jason Garcia. Did that vandalism amount include room damage?
So our vandalism amounts, that's our unassigned damage. So our room damage would be assigned damage. So no, those vandalism amounts don't include that.
Again, we have a few things that Christina and I are prepared to add. But please, any questions, and again, any question, even.
Steve, I do see another question here from Kate Kinsella. The question is, during the community circles in response to critical incidents, do you bring in appropriate professionals, counselors, etc.? And yes, we do. For the specific circles that I was referring to around suicide of a student and the death of a student, we had counselors that were in the building that we shared that information in the circles when we were setting up the space, that they were available for drop-in appointments. And yes, so we do have counselors on hand when we do circles for our student death or a student suicide.
Okay, Ross, I see under the attendee list here, it seems like there's a little blue bubble with a question mark in there. Is that a question that you have access to?
It is, and I'll go ahead and read the next question. Next question I have is, do you have any thoughts on digital restorative practices for cyber harms?
Wow. Wow, that was asked. That's interesting. We have in our work in schools, in K-12 schools, clearly there is a lot going on with cyberbullying and the Facebook and all of the stuff that goes along with that. And I guess, I want to say, and I don't want to kind of, be silly here, but just be honest. You got to bring people together. I mean, we don't have ideas on how to do it over Facebook or how to do it, online. I mean, I suppose you could all, answer questions, but being able, we know whatever the percentage is, very, very high percentage of communication that is actually nonverbal. So being able to sit and to see people, that's real critical. And so we've had a number of instances where, again, the rumor, the nasty comments and all that have been put out, on Facebook or whatever, where we bring the parties together and just have them sit face to face. And, again, being mindful not to paint everybody with the same brush, but what typically happens there, there's no surprise, it's a miscommunication. Well, I thought you said this, or I thought you did that. And when they come together and they have an opportunity to be real with one another, they talk not only about what their real intentions were, how harmed they were, but also how they can keep it from happening again, and what kept them from approaching and just talking to one another in the first place. So we've had a good number of incidents related to cyberbullying that have been very, very powerful. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Christina, if you want to go to another question.
Well, I do know that we have had staff members who have directly confronted, inappropriate messages from their students via Facebook and then in person. So they've sent them a response that contains effective statements about how they were affected by the material that was posted or sent to them. And we've also had staff members, now this isn't necessarily related to cyber harms, but we have had staff members, RAs, use text messaging and restorative, effective statements through text messaging to their residents. There was a resident who was displaying some really concerning behavior, and they were gone from the complex, and so the RA, sent them. Some of their friends were really concerned about them, and so they kept trying to get them back to the complex, and they would not come back to the complex. And what it took was an RA sending them a message that said, "I'm really concerned for you. Are you okay? I'd like to check in with you." And then the student immediately came back to the complex. So those are some ways that our RAs have utilized it to, tackle Facebook or to use text messaging. Here, Jonathan has a question about, can you talk about when restorative practices failed and how you worked through that process? I've got a great example. So, and this isn't, so I'll share this. There was incredible amounts of vandalism occurring in a community, and this was a smaller community. There were about 40 people that lived in this small standalone residence hall. And I am one of the residents of that building. I didn't oversee that building at this time, but I wanted to participate in this circle. But they were not my staff members. I did not supervise them. And so what had happened, this was earlier in the year, the circle was not effective because they weren't intentional about how they set the circle up. Now, when I talk about being intentional, I strategically place my staff around the room. So if things get off topic for whatever reason, it gets right back on the topic. And through the intentional setup of spaces, I have not seen restorative practices go wrong if you're intentional. However, these staff members were not intentional about how they facilitated this circle, and things went really wrong. And actually, we had to have a follow-up circle that other staff members came in to do because it was done so poorly. So that was more of a training issue for our staff members, and it wasn't necessarily about restorative practices failing. It was about how they were being intentional or not intentional about setting up the space.
And I also think it's really important, to think that, people need to feel safe, and that's what's critical. Your role in being a circle facilitator. Again, you're not doing counseling or any of those types of things. issues come out of a circle that needs that level of care, well, then you refer people, to the appropriate resources and to the professionals. But we're just facilitating conversations. This isn't anything that all of a sudden puts people in a different confidentiality or other types of policies or whatever. People are coming together and they're talking. It happens all the time. We're just being really creative and intentional about how to make that happen. But if you don't create an environment where people feel safe, well, then what do? They react to it. Think of us, the people that are on this call. If you're, sitting in a circle and we're going to talk about our feelings, but it's just the attitude is bad and the tone is bad and people are being mean to one another and nobody's, responding to it or challenging it. You're going to say to yourself, no way, I'm not going to do that. That's not safe. And in fact, you might even start to act out a little bit because you're feeling unsafe or you feel like this is ridiculous. And so how you go about setting that up is really critical. And again, if you do the proactive work, do it initially, it makes it a lot easier to get that tone when you want to use a responsive circle. Everybody understands this is what we do. We know what's expected of us. We know how to treat one another. We know how to be respectful towards one another. So this is just another process, another part of what we do. I have not, and I'm being very honest with you here, heard of a situation where restorative practices made anything worse, if I could say it that way. At the very least, it's a neutral event and somewhat frustrating, but it's not, we brought people together that were fine, and then all of a sudden we had a massive fist fight and people got hurt. If people are going to act that way, they're going to let you know, I ain't going to that circle. No way. I'm not sitting in there, as Christina mentioned, depending upon the level of formality. It's completely voluntary. I'm not willing to go there. I'm not going to be a part of it. That they will just choose to separate themselves and not be a part of the circle. And so those are the types of things that you see happen more often. Any other questions? I think there's a number of other questions here.
One of the questions that I also see is in the initial circles in the beginning of the year, how is it that you get the students to share initially right off the bat?
Well, you set up the space so everyone is in a circle, everyone can see everyone else. There's a talking piece. The person who's facilitating the circle, introduces the topic and then also shares their response to the question. But before they share their response, they also share which way they're going to go around the circle so that that person can start to prep what they would like to share. Now, one of the key things that's important is to build capacity. And the RAs do that through checking in with residents and saying, hey, I'd really appreciate it if you were really honest in this circle or, got people going. That capacity builds over time. But the first, those initial circles, there's the format. You have a talking piece. So whoever has a talking piece has the floor. It's a very intentional room setup. Or you can do it outside if it's not windy. We do it outside often, but only if it's in one of our courtyards where there's not a lot of wind that could impact anyone's ability to hear. So that's how we set it up, and that's how the students start to begin to share.
And the responsive circle is much higher risk than the proactive circle. So the questions that you saw initially on, what does it look like? What does the ideal community look like? What are you hoping for? What are you excited about this year? Those are relatively, low risk questions. Not without risk at all, but relatively low risk. I mean, it's not, what is your deepest, darkest fear that you're afraid might happen to you when you turn the lights off in your room at night? We're not getting into that type of stuff. Now, the responsive circle right off the bat is higher risk. There's been a problem. There's tension, there's anger, there's hurt, there's frustration. And so we would say you never do a responsive circle as the first circle that you do. Never. It's not impossible for it to go well, but I tell you what, you have some pretty exceptional people if they can handle a responsive circle and do it well. without any other experience around circles. It takes going through the proactive and the lower risk things and the sharing and developing those bonds that builds people's connection before they're willing to go to the responsive. I think one of the things that people get concerned about, which quite honestly has not been our experience in the number of years that we have been doing this and literally around the world, we get, I think, overly concerned that people are not going to want to share what's important to them. They're not going to want to share their hopes and dreams. They're not going to want to have a voice. And just quite honestly, that's not our experience. And I've been in some really, really challenging situations, and there's no way you're going to get this group of kids to talk. And when you go in there, as Christina has clearly stated and so wisely stated, set up the room, set up the tone, be wise about where you sit, where your staff is, who's next to you, and create a nice environment. People want to have an opportunity to talk. And that's what they typically do. So Ross, I see under where it says view all attendees, I see a little that little blue bubble again with the question mark in there, and I'm seeing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I just feeling a responsibility to make sure to get to them. I don't know if you have them or not, but I'm just aware of those. Ross, are you there?
It doesn't look like Ross is there.
Yeah, it looks like he just jumped out and it's going to log back in again because of like the issue that he had earlier. So while he's doing that, I just want to a couple of things. One of the things that hopefully I think is clear, but I just want to be really explicit about it, is this whole notion of equipping RAs to handle situations. And I mean, let's be honest. We walk through any college campus, walk through any res hall or anything along those lines, you're going to see a bunch of violations of policies. We know that. I mean, we're supposed to drive 55 or 65 on the highway or whatever. How many of us actually do that? Now, again, I'm not promoting speeding. Please hear me right. But, 55, between 55 and 60 or whatever it is. But technically, that's a violation. So the same thing in the residential hall. The music is technically a little loud. It's, this is not supposed to be here. That's not supposed to be said over there. The statement you made really isn't the type that we like, but it's not the type of thing that you're willing to go through judicial affairs and do a full policy violation and all of those types of things. I mean, that's the majority, a lot of interactions when they talked about in the slides there, the general concerns or the general ongoing things. How do you train a young RA to walk up to somebody whose music isn't ridiculously loud, but it is too loud? How do you deal with that? How do you deal with the person who lets their door slam a little bit too loud and it's disrupting other people, but they're not doing anything like egregious? How do you deal with that in a way that has people feel safe, has people feel okay, makes them want to be a part of the community and to care for others? Restorative practices gives that tool, the way to go about doing that, those daily interactions. I don't know if Christina wants to share the story if we have time right now, but it was a responsive circle and a student got angry and walked away, just took off.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
Yeah. And you followed that person and they were blowing you off, but yeah.
Oh, yeah. So we had a building situation where everyone was gathered. They were engaging in community standards conversations as a building, about 150 students. And one student was pretty disrespectful to the individual who was facilitating the meeting, was one of my staff members, and then got up and left. And I went out and walked, with this individual who got up and left and was disrespectful. And, I was walking with him and I said, hey, I really need to check in with you about what just occurred. And he kept walking and walking, and I kept walking with him because I don't let students just walk away from me. And, at one point I said, I feel really disrespected by you right now because I'm trying to engage in a conversation with you and you keep walking away from me. And all of a sudden, his whole demeanor changed. He, kind of snapped back, stopped walking, and was like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be disrespectful. I just have a lot going on right now." And we engaged in a conversation, and he was able to share what was going on for him. I was able to share what our policies were from the university and what our expectations are for our students. And we had a really positive interaction. And, this, for me to say I feel really disrespected right now, that's me being vulnerable with him, but that's also me sharing an effective statement, and it totally changed his demeanor. And that's the power in that intentional, all the time working with restorative practices. Because, sometimes you might want to be like, look, you're being a jerk, but that's not effective, and that's not about building community, and that's not about building relationships with our students, which is what we're focused on here at UVM. And through those relationships and through providing space for students to share how they're affected, it's really powerful. We had a vandalism circle that the RA led. And the RA, before this vandalism circle, I met with him and the residence director and the assistant residence director of the building, and we talked about how to set the tone, where we were all going to be placed in this circle with this community, and it was an all-male community. And, he set the tone from the start. He talked about how he was really frustrated about the damages occurring in the community, and that he wasn't sure what could help in this situation, and it was being vulnerable in that. And there was a student who shared how he was so embarrassed about the state of the community that he couldn't look the custodial staff member in the eyes. And that was a really powerful moment in that circle. Like, you could have heard a pin drop in that circle with these, 50 men. And, another student said, if you were at home and you vomited in the shower, would you turn around and walk away and have someone else clean it up? No. So why is that okay here? And, this community had been in the custodial logs consistently. After that meeting, they didn't show up in the custodial logs for 2 months. They ended up showing up later, but there was 2 months where they were really focused on holding each other accountable, cleaning up the messes that occurred in their community. And in fact, one time, our custodial staff member went up to that floor community and saw the men out cleaning up vandalism that had occurred in their community. So it's all about providing space for students to share. When they hear it from each other, that's when behavior changes as well. It's about building that relationship and providing space for all of their voices to talk about how they've been affected.
Do you have any other questions there, Ross?
Well, it looks like we're about time, so go ahead and wrap it up. And Steve, I'll let you talk about this, but right now on the screen is Steve's contact information, and with kind of the wrap-up email, I'll send Christina's to you all. But if you have any more questions, I'm sure, and you guys can speak to it as well, that they would be more than happy to answer your questions if you were to email them directly as well, if we had a question that we just ran out of time and you weren't able to get to.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Ross. Please feel free. My contact information is right there. Steve Core at iirp.edu. Any question that you have, that we had a good number of folks on the call today, so I know we probably weren't able to get through everything. But please feel free at any time to direct those questions to myself, and then also to Christina, the star of the show here, with those stories that are just so fantastic. And I'm sure that she'll be willing to answer. Christina, if you get overwhelmed, let me know. I'll help you with that. And there's also the website where you can learn a little bit more about our explicit program, www.buildingcampuscommunity.org, buildingcampuscommunity.org. There's also some materials that are available for you there. And then, of course, our graduate school website, iirp.edu. Please feel free to avail yourself of any of those resources there.
Yeah, and I just want to thank each and every one of our attendees for taking the time to learn a little bit about restorative practices and how we've been utilizing it here at the University of Vermont. I am definitely open to fielding any more questions that you have. I do have a plethora of stories, personal stories where I've, implemented all of the continuum from informal to formal, and it's been really exciting to use restorative practices in my work here in residential education. And, one of the things that's exciting is this summer I'm working on semester at sea and fully plan to implement restorative practices with my the students on semester at sea. So we're very excited about that as well. And my contact information will be included in the slides, but if you have any specific questions right now that you wanted to share with me, my email is colstad@uvm.edu. And thank you very much for joining us today. I really enjoyed it.
And I hope everyone will join me in thanking both Steve and Christina for spending their time and giving us all this great information. It's not necessarily easy to do a webinar, especially with us getting ready in the back channel and getting everything ready. So I want to thank them for all their time, not only now, but then also getting ready for the webinar and, scheduling and all of that. As well as, speaking of back channels and getting ready, thank you to Matthew Clifford from Wake Forest. He's the one that has made this all possible with using the system and setting it up. And so just wanted to thank him as well. And also thank you all for attending the webinar as well. Like I stated earlier, if you are listening to this webinar and just thinking, man, this is something that I'd love to do, or I know somebody who would be a great person to present. So if you or anyone else is interested in presenting, please either contact me at r.beiTzel@tcu.edu, or if you go to the web page on the NASPA Knowledge Communities website, you'll see a form that you can fill out that kind of gets the process going as far as talking about starting a webinar and so presenting as well. And so once again, Matthew, Christina, Steve, thank you all so much for being here today and giving us the opportunity to learn a little bit about your knowledge and all the research you've been doing over these past years.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Ross.
Yes, thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much. And for you all attending still on the line, what I will be doing is in the next few days sending you some of the information that came from this webinar. So we'll be sending out PDF versions of the slides as well as a link to the recording of this webinar. So if there's something that you really heard that you were interested in but you just couldn't write it down quick enough, we'll have a opportunity to get you the recording of the webinar so you can go back and view it as well. With that, also, I will send out the contact information, one again, from our two presenters. So if you do have any more questions that weren't answered, we can get those answers to you as well. So thank you, everyone, so much again, and hopes everyone has a great day.
Great. Thank you.
Great. Thanks.